When was the last time you took a shower?
This morning.
What day is it today?
I don't even remember. I took a shower at home. I washed my face this morning, if that counts.
Oh man, it's been a while.
Wednesday morning, 2 days ago.
Tuesday.
I've been baby wiping it.
Showers are boring.
An actual proper shower's definitely been about 3-4 days ago, and we're smelling quite bad.
I want to jump in the lake.
We are going to jump in the lake.
Each year since 1984, an annual miracle of faith, fellowship, and music known as the Cornerstone Festival takes flight. We're taking a look back at an event unlike any other.
Who was that guy? I wonder whatever happened to him. Hello, I'm John J. Thompson. This month marks 10 years since the final Cornerstone Festival graced the rolling hills of West Central Illinois. And while the world is full of music festivals, there's never been anything quite like Cornerstone. From its deeply countercultural roots and its relentlessly progressive aesthetic to the simple but radical gospel sensibility operating in its DNA, Cornerstone was unique. It propelled numerous artists into long careers, it gave life and momentum to record labels, maybe even entire genres, and stood for 29 years as an example of glorious, messy, radical, barely functioning beauty and grace. It's not an exaggeration to say that the Cornerstone Festival impacted my life in massive ways. As we'll talk about later in the show, the first 3 festivals and the months between completely altered the trajectory of my life spiritually, relationally, and vocationally.
So you came back from the first fest. Did you go to work for Wheaton Religious right away?
No, I didn't. I did come home and start writing this thing that later somebody called my manifesto. It was, and I wrote in a notebook sort of what I thought needed to happen in order for bands like 77s to be famous. It's kind of like what a teenage kid would think. For this very different episode of the True Tunes podcast, we have gathered a ton of clips, some from a documentary film I made about the fest 20 years ago, and many more from other sources. Bruce combed through hundreds of hours of fan-sourced video and audio, and also turned up rare television coverage of the festival, including coverage of the inaugural 1984 event in Grayslake, Illinois.
One of the most unique aspects of an event like Cornerstone 84 is the strong sense of community that emerges when people come together for a common purpose. For 3 days in June, Lake County Fairgrounds became home to people from all over the world.
Fort Scott, Kansas.
Buffalo, New York.
From Sheboygan, Wisconsin.
Milford, Michigan.
I come from Switzerland.
We've also invited some of the people closest to the formation and production of the festival to offer their reflections as we look back. We'll check in with Rez Band's Glenn Kaiser and former Cornerstone magazine editor John Trott in one conversation, and former Rez drummer and festival director John Herron elsewhere. We also got some audio postcards from you, our listeners, to sprinkle in amongst the interview clips and musical moments.
Within 48 hours of being at the festival grounds, I was clogging on stage with Chagall Guevara. That was the same day I realized I hadn't eaten solid food in 3 days, merely running on adrenaline and frozen lemonade. Late at night sometimes, I still hear the faint sounds.
Clog, dead. I woke up in ashes, well, today.
When I was on staff at the festival, I used to create what we called video scrapbook DVDs. Well, maybe what you are about to hear could be considered a sort of audio scrapbook, a headphone documentary designed to help us remember what happened between 1984 and 2012, what it meant, and what it might mean for us today.
I'd love to see something come again. I'm discouraged by the political discourse in this country. I'd like to think that we could put those things aside and just get together and fellowship and have fun and enjoy great music.
And a little heads up, Like the festival itself, this special episode is a bit of a beast. We've broken it into 3 chunks, but, well, let's just say I'm glad we're getting this out to you all ahead of some road trips and a holiday weekend. Whether you choose to listen in bits and pieces or as one long adventure is up to you, but grab yourself a lemon shake-up and a ribeye sandwich and make yourself comfortable, or maybe go find yourself a really hot, dusty, and uncomfortable place if you want that Cornerstone immersive experience, because the adventure takes off right after we take care of a little bit of housekeeping.
Hey there, I'm Mark Feldbush from Columbus, Ohio. I'm a Patreon backer of the True Tunes podcast. I've also left a rating and review of the show at Apple Podcasts. Really wasn't that hard. It didn't cost me anything. But this show means a heck of a lot to me, and I know that reviews and ratings make a big difference when it comes to how and if others discover these conversations. Would you take a few minutes, maybe even while you're listening, if you're not driving of course, to leave a rating and a review? Even if you don't listen on Apple Podcasts, the reviews posted there push out the podcast to platforms all around the world. Oh, and take some time to tell your friends about the show. Let's drive the numbers up together. Thanks.
I was thrilled to get Glenn Kaiser and John Trott together for a conversation about Cornerstone. The first voice you'll hear, other than mine, will be Glenn's. So let's step into the virtual True Tunes interview suite and back in time as we try to get a bit more of a handle on the beast that was Cornerstone. We're coming up on, or by the time people are hearing this, it's been 10 years since Cornerstone Festival ended. And I know that it was absolutely formative for me in a lot of ways. So we're taking some time to reflect on what Cornerstone was, and also not just to think nostalgically, but also to think proactively and even, future imaginatively. What could happen? What should be happening? What might we do in the absence of something like Cornerstone? And there's some things I want to drill into a little bit about the roots of both Jesus People USA and what ended up leading to the Cornerstone Festival. So tell me about the earliest days of Jesus People and how the idea of community and culture were gelling together. I know that some of the Jesus People went to England and were doing something that ended up becoming Greenbelt, and so tell me about that and how festivals and arts and rock and roll and the counterculture and Jesus, how that all kind of played together for you guys. Maybe Glenn, start with you because you were in the band doing that, and then I want to hear from John Trott as well.
I would say this: it wasn't thought about very deeply. A bunch of young Christians were involved in the Jesus People in Milwaukee, and all of a sudden bands sprung up. Resurrection Band was one of those early on. But out of the Jesus People in Milwaukee, there were 3 teams that went out. There was a graduation from our Bible school, and one team, as you say, went over, Jim Polisari and his group went over they ended up in the UK, in England, and had a vision for what became Greenbelt Festival. I mean, they started it. Henry Wong, who was for many years the director of our Cornerstone Festival that Jesus People USA put on, was a part of that movement. Of course, Woodstock had happened, and all the other mainstream festivals, and so the idea was find a place to go, and they found a farm field, and a landowner willing to give it a roll, brought in the porta toilets, and built a stage, and totally grassroots, a bunch of Jesus freaks. The punchline is that it was the first of its kind. I don't know of any other festival on earth that was quite like Greenbelt, and it progressed over the years. But it was really because of what Jesus had done in our lives, and we wanted to share the gospel. Very simple. We saw the dysfunction in the church, and so that kind of spawned a number of festivals around the world. And as time went on, folks like Greenbelt and ourselves at Cornerstone Festival, it's like when we say you're all welcome, we literally meant everybody. So at the end of the day, this idea of the arts, including music, but also the fine arts, painting, the Imaginarium that we had at Cornerstone Festival, films. When we had speakers at Cornerstone Festival, we brought in people and dealt with issues that mostly in the church, in any part of the body of Christ, or most of it anyway, these things weren't going to be discussed. And they weren't going to be discussed that way. That was the gist of it. It was a burden to reach people with Jesus and the simple good news of Jesus. But we also understood the need for discipleship and to instruct and teach and bring a disparate people and voices in.
In the early 1970s, as the peace train ran out of gas for many hippies and counterculture types, a sort of revival gripped several U.S. cities. Having experimented with drugs and free love, thousands, maybe millions of young people turned to the long-haired, radical, revolutionary figure of Jesus.
We were all pretty much freaks, hippies, came out of the street, doing dope, living for pleasure, I guess, Came to know the Lord, and what do we do now? And it was like, read the Bible and apply it.
Lord, we dedicate this cause, this purpose of why we're here to you and to your glory, and not for us and not for an organization or just a group of people that gather together. We give it to you, Father, and ask for you to have all the praise, all the glory, all the attention this weekend. We thank you for this privilege. We thank you for this honor, Lord God. And everybody said, Amen.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the only show on earth that asks you to name it and claim it.
I think for me, the funny thing about history is you keep reinterpreting it via the lens of the present. Right. And so I was quite a romantic about the Jesus movement. And in some ways I still am. I'm not saying that I've abandoned ship in my head or my heart regarding the Jesus movement. Our journey was one in which we tried, and we failed sometimes too. I will say that right up front, to bring a transformative power of the gospel that was culturally transformative, not just appearance transformative. Right. And I think I was very involved at the festival, just like we were with Cornerstone Magazine, in trying to do that cognitively, trying to feed people's heads, the old hippie phrase, and let that through the head into the heart. Let's move you into a new way of seeing, a Jesus way of seeing. What we were trying to do with the magazine and with the festival, particularly with our seminar tents that we set up, was to pull that off.
What I recall as a teenager going to those classes was that there could be some very, you might generously call it spirited discussion. You might call them just flat out arguments. And I went to seminars where I was like, yeah, I don't want to go here. I mean, I did go to things that I needed to hear that I knew I agreed with to just reinforce things sometimes, but I wanted to go hear those things that were going to provoke me and challenge me, because I knew I was in an environment that was rare, that I wasn't going to get to see that very often. And so only later did I realize how unique that was. Really, the majority of the Christian subculture shifted from this kind of counterculture idea in the 60s into more of a subculture idea by the 80s. And Cornerstone was never really doing that. It always felt more like this was really kind of the same culture we were all a part of. It was right in line with the music and the art and the fashion and all that stuff. And it was going to tackle the issues that we were actually dealing with in the real world in a way that we needed to have that iron sharpening iron, even if it caused sparks to fly.
According to Glenn Kaiser, the role of the musician in today's culture is an important one. A pastor in the Jesus People USA Fellowship, Glenn's understanding of music and his commitment to biblical discipleship, coupled with a pastor's heart, makes him one of the most unique individuals in Christian music today. His seminar, Music, Musicians, and Ministry.
Some of us are cultural bigots because we think straight conservative people. You know, Jesus didn't die for yuppies in the suburbs. Well, he did. And your culture is no more holy than theirs is. And theirs is no more unholy, or yours is no more unholy than theirs. Again, not too tight, not too low, not too high. If it's not morals, don't worry about it. And yet try to be appropriate. Try to be appropriate. You know, I don't put my hair up 10 feet high to walk into, First Baptist Sunday morning.
If you just take in ministry through music, the Word of God, books, and you don't give out, you will become a spiritual glutton, and you will become spiritually sluggish. God wants to fill our minds with wisdom and knowledge, with vision and purpose, with spiritual dynamic, that we can run and not grow weary. And I believe the fellowship together, praying with one another, sharing with one another, and making that an ongoing practice in our life is one of the basics for spiritual growth.
My first burden, of course, is spiritual health, that they may know how to walk with God, they may get relationships healed. I think some of these young people will go back to their homes and have healing experiences with their parents and with their churches.
What was Cornerstone Magazine relative to Rez Band and Jesus People, and what was Cornerstone Magazine relative to the festival, and how did that evolve? And how important was that to this thing working?
I think our idea was to make people think. Whether you agreed with us or not, we wanted to leave you going, wow, I hadn't thought of that before, or I should think about that some more.
Let me insert that there were two things that I think were really important in all this. We encouraged all the musicians, all of them, who we invited to the fest, and all of the seminar leaders and speakers. Please, if there's any way we can work it out for you to be around, we encourage you to get as close and sit down in the grass outside the tent. Sit down, meet people at the merch table and sign autographs and chit-chat, but hang out and interact with people for a while. Answer their questions. Get to know people. This is about people. It's not only about art. It's not only about speaking. The challenge was for some of these folks, some of them, they happen to be, particularly speakers, happen to be a little bit more conservative in their natural culture. They have all these subculture kids, a lot of kids, young, but some older people, sitting in the grass outside the tent, 30, 40 of them, hashing over the issues. But some of those speakers basically begged us if they could come back year after year, because they didn't have that kind of opportunity or openness in very many places where they went to speak and share. It was always about the Lord and about people and that openness to issues. This was like DNA for us.
They may rock like hell, but they're the house band of heaven. Ladies and gentlemen, the 77!
That festival helped sustain some belief in ourselves as artists and people, because I would go there even without the band. I'd go there on my own, maybe play with Vector, Charlie Peacock, or whatever. That was just a nice feeling, because when you're at home, just being kind of a faceless entity, thinking your music isn't having any impact on anyone, it's nice to go someplace where all these people know who you are and also are telling you what your music actually meant.
I think probably I remember the guys at the warehouse in Sacramento telling me that there was this Jesus Rock Festival. I think that was the way it was described to me. And I was trying to, they said it's sort of like a Woodstock with Jesus freaks.
So many people come to the festival year after year. I think finally are starting to understand the format of our track seminars, what we're trying to do with our teaching, what we're trying to do with our music. It's a lot different than a lot of the other events that are going around the country. So we're becoming more like a family in that way. People come back year after year and they're getting used to what's going on. They're catching the vision of it. We're all one Christian family in Christ. The brothers and sisters getting together. Every year it's been growing a little bit, I think, by word of mouth, and people are just getting to know Cornerstone and what we're like, and the nature of it. It's not just for green hair punkers anymore. It's for the nice youth group too, and the adults and the older people who have grandparents come and stuff. So it's a nice event. We hope that somewhere along the line, when people go back to wherever they come from, Iowa, Kansas, we draw from 40 states, some of this 4 days would go back with them. It's kind of a lot like the old Bible camps. People get revived and challenged, and hopefully some of that will carry them through. But some of the kids who don't have fellowship, maybe this is the one thing a year that helps carry them through till the next year. And whatever it takes to keep you going with the Lord, I think we want to do, and I think that's what makes it count.
Cornerstone Festival, that spirit, the thing that I love about it the most is that let's have some collisions. Let's have a guy come in and teach on Christian nationalism, which we did way back when. I mean, that topic got discussed way back when. And but I'll tell you this, I don't think even we understood. I don't think we had any realization of how deep in the heart of what we called white evangelicalism that was embedded in what we thought we believed.
There's different levels of maturity. And I mean, spiritual maturity, knowledge of church history, of world history, engagement with people not like me, not like us, not like folks that I'm comfortable with, you know what I'm saying? And willingness to put yourself in a place to where you can actually have dialogue and you're not simply going there for your own monologue purposes. So we had people at Cornerstone who weren't believers. We had people who had fallen away. They had at one time had some sort of an understanding or a relationship with God, or however you want to say it. We had people who were staunch on the right end of the spectrum politically, or a left end, and a bunch of moderates, and every kind of hodgepodge and all the rest, right? It takes so much patience and really an intentional willingness to be a statesman or stateswoman, a person who's willing to be a peacemaker but not agree. And so a glimpse of that happened at Cornerstone Festival every summer, and that's part of the reason why people came back. At the time, the only thing I ever thought was this: we are providing with this festival space and time for very disparate groups of people to actually hang together and maybe do more than show up at a concert and dig the music. And for me, at the time, at the very beginning, I thought, this is a miracle. For these folks who are so on opposite ends of the spectrum, theologically, politically, culturally, subculturally, for them to all come together and actually be able to have some dialogue. Now that's painful, because of course your best friend may be going, what the heck are you doing hanging out with them?
I am the resurrection and the light. He who believes in me will never die. I am the resurrection and the light. He who believes in me will live a new life. I have come to bring you truth, and I have come to bring you life. And if you will believe, then you shall live. I am the resurrection and the life.
John, I wanted to ask you, have you thought, when your imagination kicks in and you see kind of how things in the culture have evolved, how do you think the festival might have evolved, and what might it have looked like as things had changed?
I don't know, because I have a little bit maybe of a medium dark take on that, at least, which is I think we would have ended up being marginalized. There was one point at which I think, Christianity Today and everybody would embrace Cornerstone and embrace Japuza for that matter as being, hey, you guys are really cool. You're the cool kids on the block. And maybe to some degree, frankly, we believed it a little bit too much. Looking at it now, I think if we would have kept going and tried to be faithful to the journey we were on, I think as this Christian nationalism thing became more and more and more pronounced, that a lot of those, the audiences would have shifted away from us. In fact, I think that started to happen, actually, even before it was totally over. So we as a community, Jesus people, would have had to have grown, and hopefully are growing in that as we try to be faithful to Jesus and faithful to loving our neighbor. I don't know what would have happened to us.
There was a beautiful time there. The first time I got to go to Cornerstone for the whole festival, I went with a group of charismatic Catholic college students. It was like
great.
I met everybody at the festival, and to call it evangelical to me just meant these people take Jesus very seriously and want to have a Bible study and like be engaged with their faith in their mind, and they were willing to talk about evolution, and they were willing. It wasn't about this political definition of evangelical.
For me, it's the people that love Jesus. And they really do love Jesus. And they aren't going to agree on everything, but you can sit there and you start talking and you go, oh, you too? Oh, you too? It's, you've had encounters with Christ. You've fed the hungry for Christ. You've wept with somebody and Christ was in the heart of it. You're making community, which I think was the other huge factor with Cornerstone, is it was just a little, it was kind of a pup tent of community. It popped up and we had community for 3 or 5 days and then it was over and we all went away kind of wishing it could be permanent. And God willing, maybe one day it will be. Anyway, those are the core issues that I think haunt us now.
And let's be honest, there were churches who really had great hearts, more traditional, institutional churches, and were open to the Jesus people, open to the young street Christians. And there were churches that would have never dealt with them at all.
To talk about the history of the festival, in fact, this is the way I look at the Jesus movement. I encountered Jesus in 1973. That's when I became a Christian. And I was out by myself at a guy's farmhouse and got baptized in the Holy Spirit, and it was flat out mind-blowing, and it was an encounter that changed my life. But the question is, how can we take what we got from the history of the Jesus movement or even the festival? We're there at that festival. We had those encounters. We had that wonderful, wonderful experience. How do we bring it into the now? How do we bring that into where we are right now with our eyes wide open? How do we win people to Jesus? How do we tell people about the incomparable nature of loving? It's a hard sell. If I was 16 in 1973, if I was 16 now, get that out of my face. I know who you are, and I know what you're selling. There are a lot of people, a lot of young people they're flat out done, How do we make an impact on that kind of a situation with what we know? And I think Cornerstone Festival gave us something beautiful, and, because it was a God thing. First most, it was, there is a God, a supernatural, there is love, and he can be known.
Cornerstone, the music was awesome. The teaching, the clashing, the friction, that was life-changing. There was something there unique to this planet in my life. Was I slipped into that thing, and every time I walked through the door, it was like I felt that love. And yes, I felt it through the smiles of the people that I knew loved me, And then I felt the ability to love other people and to give them that experience. But it was something deeper and bigger than that. This love was accessible to outsiders, insiders, old people, disabled people, odd people that didn't fit in any kind of box. And you just knew, like, this person, if it wasn't for a community like this person would be utterly alone. And the music often was an excuse, I think, to gather us together. I loved it and it was important, but it was really an excuse. What we really were gravitating towards was this love.
Yeah.
So, man, it was just, I thank you guys for doing that. Looking back now, what would you like, just a brief kind of nugget, what would you like to say to people that, what have you learned, or what final kind of thoughts about the festival, lessons learned, anything like that from the rubble that we can take with us as we think about rebuilding? What should we be doing in our own individual lives that can bring that little microcosm of that community into our street, into our home, into our relationships?
When it comes to community, one of the most painful lessons to learn is that even at your best, you're going to hurt people. That's part of community too, and you really are going to hurt people. Now, what does that mean? I mean, sometimes it means there's some communities that hurt people so badly and hurt so many people so badly, the best thing for that community is to go away. It probably is fatally broken in some way. And so, to me, ultimately, and it's become a phrase for me, this is my own little original prayer to add to all those short prayers that are out there that are really good ones. This is my homely one. And that is you are closer than I imagine you closer. And that's what I believe. I believe Christ is closer than we can possibly imagine. And guilt, it isn't that we aren't guilty, it's rather that we shouldn't get overly focused on it, but instead strive to do better, strive to get closer. How can we get closer to Jesus? How can we get closer to others? How can I find a way to get through all this noise and cruelty to tell somebody about the God of love? I mean, or to show somebody the God of love in my own brokenness.
We're going to take a quick break, but we'll be back with more of this Cornerstone Reverie right after this.
Hey, this is Mark Feldbush, and I'm a supporter of the True Tunes podcast. I've been reading True Tunes since it was a print journal and first on the interwebs in the late 90s. When the podcast became a reality, well, I knew I wanted to be a part of this ongoing conversation. I'm glad to say that folks like me and many others support the podcast with monthly donations of $5, $10, even $20 that help to cover the costs of producing and hosting the show. As a thanks for our support, we get early access to episodes and high-quality lossless WAV files of each episode that we get to download. We also have occasional Zoom meetups, some special live streams, discounts on True Tunes swag, and a whole lot more. You can join me and the other patrons by visiting patreon.com/TrueTunes, or you can find the link on the show notes page. If an ongoing patronage thing isn't quite right for you, but you'd like to give a tip to help with the costs associated with this show, you can find links for that at the show notes page. Thanks for listening.
Hey, this is Ray, and I'm a Patreon backer of the True Tunes podcast. I also follow and listen to the weekly Spotify Gallery Stage mixtape that John curates for us every week. And boy, is it eye-opening. Every week, usually on Wednesdays, the mix is updated around 40 songs from brand new releases to deep cuts, and from across a wide range of genres, including rock, Americana, indie, gospel, blues, sacred music, soul, and more. I've discovered tons of new songs and artists, and have been reminded of things I loved from long ago. It's also great to hear a mix that blends up great music that is just good, beautiful, and true. You can find the mix on the front page at truetunes.com or on the show notes page for this episode. And if you follow it, it will live there in your Spotify browser and update automatically every week. And don't miss the massive archive list, where all the previous lists get saved. It now features over 5,000 songs. And as great as Spotify is for music discovery, please support the artists you love once you discover them. Thanks.
And now, back to our exploration of the festival that changed everything for so many of us.
We see wave after wave of people in the street playing their songs but missing the beat.
People, why can't you understand? Fools that know the scholars and love's supposed to have.
One of the people I knew I needed to talk to for this project was my old boss, John Herron. Johnny was the director of the festival from the late 90s until its end. But even back when it first began, as the drummer of Rez Band and one of the pastors at the Jesus People USA community in Chicago, he was instrumental in its formation and direction. A big part of what we're trying to do is find and regather some of the old tribe and then welcome a younger generation into this, people that just never got the benefit. And so it being the 10th year since the final festival.
I know, I was surprised to hear that when you said that.
Isn't that wild?
Really? Has it been that long?
I know. Isn't that wild?
Jeez.
2012 to 2022. Yeah. I couldn't believe it either, but we thought, well, we can't let a marker like that go by without at least stopping and thinking a little bit about this and talking about Cornerstone and what the festival was, especially because a lot of people hear about it, but we're never there. And then those of us who were there, it's kind of like this big hole in our life that we still can't get through the 4th of July weekend without thinking about it. So,
I do the same thing every summer. I start thinking about the festival again. You know, those were some of the funnest and best years of my life.
Yeah. First, if you could think back to when the festival was first coming together and your perspective on that, what did it take to actually put a thing like Cornerstone on, and how did that evolve over the years?
By the time we started in 1984, I had been, playing in Rez Band for 12 years by then or something. We started in 72. I mean, we were just in our infancy back then. We had played festivals in the early 80s. I mean, one of the reasons that we did Cornerstone was through our experience at other festivals. Going to those festivals, I felt there was a hole in the gap. I mean, I think those festivals were like Creation, we'd been to a couple times, and, they were doing a good job of what they were doing. But there was, I remember Rez Band always being scheduled around 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, because I think it was a little too threatening to maybe have rock and roll in the dark. The kids might start. I mean, really, that's kind of the way it was. The dark was reserved for your more conservative artists. The rock and roll was always in the afternoon. And anyway, it just felt to me that there was a need for something more. And of course, Cornerstone, for better or worse, and I think it was mostly for better, was also very committed to wanting to kind of meld more in-depth teaching with music and artists that weren't maybe getting the attention that we felt that they needed. But the infrastructure part of it was something I always enjoyed. Even, building the stage every year. I mean, of course, those first 7 years, we were at Lake County Fairgrounds, which we had to get in and get out within a few days, which I think is maybe even more typical at what most festivals, later when we had our own grounds, we got pretty spoiled. At the time we started the festival, I was full time traveling and doing with Rez Band, or a lot anyway. It took up a good portion of our year. So we tapped Henry to be the director, and he was a great guy to do it. He was smart, super organized, and was a great guy to do to really run the day to day. I was kind of the liaison between the organization that put Cornerstone on and Henry. I was the guy who kind of, in some ways, was Henry's boss. But he had a lot of, freedom to run and organize the event as he saw fit. We really trusted what he did. And I'm still, super grateful for all the years that Henry put in. We would move out onto the grounds I think we could only get there about a week or maybe 4 or 5 days sometimes, probably about a week before the event. And, we built our own main stage back then. We didn't hire a company. We just ordered the scaffolding. We built it. A lot of the stuff was just trial and error, but it was great. I mean, really, I miss those days. Of course, I was younger and more full of beans back then and had the energy and the strength to do it.
I'm Lee Nash from Sixpence None the Richer, and Cornerstone is a very special place for us as a band, and me personally, we've been playing for at least 9 years now in a row, I think we started in 91 or 92, and just absolutely love it here, and it's such a great environment, and I feel really comfortable. I feel comfortable walking around and look forward to just kind of hanging around in the heat and the hay and the smell and the whatnot, and just adore it. And I think it's just a really special environment because these are people of God that put it on and are very careful about everything that goes into it, and I think it shows. It's a very sweet atmosphere, and that's what makes it so special.
A lot of artists have talked about how they always felt like Cornerstone was different for them because the organizers of the festival were artists and they actually knew what artists needed. They felt like, they're one of us. They're not just people kind of throwing us out there to the wolves, and they actually cared about things. And can you think of examples of ways that you oriented the festival to try to care for the artists?
We tried to accommodate artists with the gear they wanted, have a good selection of gear on the grounds, and meet special needs if we could. And we try to get everybody as much as possible. It wasn't always possible to have a decent sound check and really not get rushed through it. We also tried to encourage the artists to come and stay multiple days and just enjoy the festival. At Cornerstone, there was definitely times where a lot of artists stayed for multiple days, stayed the whole weekend, some of them. I mean, you were there all those years. Cornerstone was a little wild, a little crazy. I look back on it, when you have something to protect, you have to start making more and more rules and worry about insurance and liability. And of course, we were probably a little more homegrown. I mean, we did things that other festivals just, they begged me not to do, like allow kids to swim in that lake, or all of our generator stages, and letting people come early 2 or 3 days and hang around the grounds. And, we went so late at night. I mean, we'd have concerts going till 2, 3 in the morning often. And so, a lot of those things people said, you guys are out of your mind doing that stuff, But I remember Tim Landis way early on told me,
he was from Creation Festival, right?
Yeah, from Creation Fest. And of course, Tim was kind of in some ways, he was kind of the godfather of this festival thing. He really had it down to a science. And Tim was very smart and always very, very kind. I always enjoyed working with Tim. But he told me, he said, the problem with Cornerstone is that it's run by a bunch of artists. I mean, literally, he told me that. He said, that's you guys', it's kind of like your best strength, but it's also your biggest weakness. That, you guys aren't like businessmen or that kind of organizers, that you're too close to it. But, I shudder a little bit now as I'm older and that, some of the risk we took, but at the time we just were dedicated to, having fun, letting people kind of be who they were. I have some personal regrets, things that I would have done different, or things that I look back now that I think maybe we should have done different. But, I don't know if everybody would agree with those. I guess that's true anywhere in life. I also have so many fond memories and feel like there was, it was blessed in a lot of ways.
Come on, pretty baby. Put your little hand in mine. People shaking on the dance floor. Everybody's feeling fine. Waste another minute, step into the light. Come on and dance with me. I believe it. Tell your daddy that we're gone. Tell everyone I'm feeling down, there's a party going on. Come move a little closer, let me hold you tight. Come on and dance with me.
Tell me about the growth, and if you expected that and what you thought was behind that growth.
The first 7 years we ran the event, there at Lake County Fairgrounds. And it felt like, being close to a big city, having people being able to come for day tickets and not having to, was the right move. But we actually put together like a little think tank down in Nashville. It was a guy who ran a book publishing company, somebody from, I think, CAA, and a couple other folks, and a pastor of a big church down there. And we went down, Henry and I did, and just kind of used them as a sounding board, like, what could we do better or different? And I remember the one thing that I left there with the most imprinted on me was you should probably move the event out of the Chicago area. And that seemed like horrible advice to me. I thought, well, really? Because, we're right next to this. But they said, really, Chicago, you're competing with all kinds of entertainment. You've got everything going on, concerts every weekend and, this and that and sporting events. And you're so close, people can, say, well, maybe I'll go Friday. Oh, no, well, I'll go Saturday. Or, well, I got too busy. And so the more we thought about that, we started thinking, well, maybe that's right. Maybe that's good advice. And then, of course, right after that, we got contacted by the Lake County Fair Board saying, guess what? We got annexed by Grays Lake. Grays Lake expanded their city boundaries, took over the fairground, which had always sat right outside of the city limits, and said, we have a 7 o'clock sound ordinance. No outdoor music after 7. We're like, well, we don't even get going till 7. I mean, that just seemed like that was impossible. So they said, we don't want to see you guys go, but at the same time, and they did say, we'll give you a 1-year grace period that you can, but after that, you're done. If you're going to stay, you have to have your music over by 7 o'clock at night, outdoors music. So that, obviously we were now looking for something else. And then a good friend of mine brought me a little ad out of the Chicago Tribune that said 580-acre campground with a 120-acre lake and a phone number. And we literally called them up, and it turned out it was a bank that had repossessed this little campground out in, south of Peoria there. And so we just drove out and looked at the place, and we thought, this is perfect. This is what we want. And of course, back then land was cheap, relatively speaking. I mean, we bought that place we bought it for $325,000, almost 600 acres with a 120-acre lake in it. We jumped on it, and we actually didn't even use our grace period year we had. And, and it was a lot of hustle bustle to get it going out there. But We did hope that it would. We also worried that it would maybe be our death, but at the same time we hoped that it would grow the event by that. Basically it was too far out of Chicago area to make it a day trip anymore. It was a 4-hour drive, so you kind of had to commit to the whole event.
I will never forget my first Cornerstone Festival experience. I was 17 years old. It was Cornerstone 1992. The end of the festival was the violet burning. First time I'd ever seen intelligent lighting, and the first time I'd seen that much fog in a tent. And I remember standing in the middle of the fog, drinking an ice cold cherry clearly Canadian with the scent of incense in the air, and Mike Pritzl just singing his heart out. And it was such an intense memory, and it's really shaped my expectations of what a musical experience could be and should be from then on. So many rich memories, but that's a deep one.
I think people were very, very wary and very, very cautious as to how to receive the people that came to Cornerstone, who were dressed very, very unusually according to Bushnell standards.
They did look a little different, not that there wasn't some rather different looking people in Bushnell. There were an awful lot of people who came to the festival who had unusual hairdo. They had unusual clothes.
What really surprised me was some of the costumes that people wearing, their hairdos.
It was very spiky and really colored.
He had a big cone shaped about 3 foot above his head to a point.
Now we see more of the tattoos and the body piercings and the heavy cable, metal ropes and cables and stuff.
They came in many times in automobiles packed with all kinds of suitcases and tents and at least 6 people to every vehicle, it appeared.
A lot of people were concerned because they thought, it'll be drugs and rockers. Even though they say they're Christian, that's probably not right. They're from Chicago.
I think we were all a little bit apprehensive as far as just not knowing anything about the group and hearing the vast numbers that they had and stuff like that be coming to town.
There was that rumor it was cult.
It was almost like a Midwestern culture that was isolated, much like it maybe hadn't changed for the last 50 years. And now you see all of the people coming who are talking about hard rock music, rap music, all the other kinds of music coming to a Christian rock festival. And the police didn't have to worry about any fights, didn't have to worry about any problems with traffic. The most serious problem was how do you get there?
We found 2 high school girls walking from the train station to go out to the festival, not realizing that this part on the map was 20 miles. We just started driving our van in there when the train came by, and we'd take people. So now, as it stands, I'm a world-renowned preacher.
It went well, except we were out of stock on stuff.
Our community found out that there was a financial gain. And so the gas station certainly put a sign up, said, "Welcome, Cornerstone." The grocery store and hardware stores.
I know a lot of the smaller stores thought that it wouldn't be a great thing, but I did.
Every person that ever had personal contact with someone who is a resident of Bushnell, it was always a polite, positive interaction.
I think that everybody is well pleased with the group and organization and the people that come.
Somewhere in there, Henry had come and said, hey, my wife and I want to go on the mission field with Wycliffe Bible translators. And, he'd been really faithful holding down the fort for years at Cornerstone. And Rez Band had kind of begun to run its course. We've been going strong for, years and years. And I was ready to get off the road. So I asked Henry if he could stick on one more year because we had a lot of stuff scheduled for Rez Band coming up that year, but I knew it was going to be some of our farewell tours. So he did. He hung in there one more year. He literally wrote me a book. He had like a big loose leaf notebook that with all the every person we'd used, bands, this, that, and he even had a big timeline. Here's where I usually start ordering this and that and how many of everything. So that was definitely a big help in getting involved in the nuts and bolts of it. But I wanted to expand the event, by bringing in Tooth and Nail Day, eventually bringing in the generator stages. I mean, maybe some of those changes that helped it really grow also in the end maybe helped it, was part of its demise. I don't know. I mean, the bread and butter of Christian festivals was attracting organized Christian youth groups. And of course the gatekeepers are pretty conservative. And I don't blame them. They want to feel like if I'm going to send off, 15, 20 teenagers somewhere, it's going to be the adults are really in charge. And of course, no doubt at Cornerstone, when you went to most Christian festivals, from the moment you pulled in, you knew the adults were in charge.
Yeah.
I mean, from people directing you where you could park, what you couldn't walk on, where you could go, checking every ticket. It was obviously that this isn't organized by the adults. You went to Cornerstone, you might have wondered if anybody was in charge. Truth is, that's a little bit of who I am.
Yeah.
And I didn't mind the organized chaos. I kind of thrived in it. I loved it. We wanted to have a festival that was kind of for everybody, and for people that weren't necessarily believers. I knew that. I grew up in the church. I had a lot of questions as a teenager, and I also was naughty as a teenager. I mean, I wanted to have freedom. I didn't want to go to some kind of event where everything was just laid out. I wanted the unknown. I wanted to be able to stay up late, run around, act crazy. I mean, I remember literally being in my office, the little mobile trailer I used as an office at the event. And I looked out my window, and right behind us was a roll of those porta potties, those plastic porta potties. And sure enough, I see some kid jump up on the porta potties, and he runs down this row, about 20 of them, and landing on each one, and the roof semi-collapses and then pops back, and it's like boom, 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 boom. And then at the very end, he just fell right off and just bit it. I mean, 8 feet, and wham, hit the ground and got up and just ran off. And of course, within about 10 seconds, about 5 porta potty doors come flying open, and people are looking like, what in the heck just happened? And I remember laughing my heart out. I just thought it was so funny. And I thought, well, hey, that's something I would have done.
We were kind of nervous. This first show we've been nervous for a long time. But we were really honored to play on this stage right here because many bands have played here, and it was an honor to be here and play in front of this crowd here at Cornerstone.
Till
when the festival got so big in the early 2000s, the stakes really did get pretty high with it, didn't it? Like the cost got really high to run a festival that big.
One of the advices that came to me from several people was never buy your own grounds. It's just way too expensive. It'll eat you out of house and home. You know, rent a property. Don't buy your own place. And of course, Cornerstone worked so well having our own place because, I mean, to be honest, we had very, very little regulatory scrutiny out there. I mean, nobody paid attention. We were out in the middle of nowhere. We could dig a hole the size of a house if we wanted and cover it up whenever we wanted. You know, so we enjoyed the freedom of having so little anybody looking over our shoulders. We could take our time to set it up, tear it down, clean it up. But at the same time, it did get expensive. I mean, there were years we spent $40,000 on gravel. But we had about 5 miles of gravel roads. Mm-hmm. We spent $8 or $10,000 on sand every year for the beach, and our electric bill there was $60,000 a year. And then we had more than one grounds caretaker. We had 5, keeping hundreds of acres mowed. We had groundskeeper with, health care and, this and that. And it after a while, maybe I didn't have the foresight to see it coming, but we just ended up creating something that in order to sustain it, it took, we had to have a good year every year or we got in trouble. I mean, the first 7 years that we did this event in Lake County Fairgrounds, to be honest with you, we probably lost $1 million over those 7 years. It was not unusual to lose $250,000 at a year, but that wasn't really sustainable. We had to get it to a point where it could self-support, and we did hit that sweet spot there for a number of years where we kind of we had some years where we actually made a little bit of money. And then we had years where it just kind of broke even. And then near the end, as the event got a little freer, a little wilder, more, late night, we faced the competition for that base group of the organized church youth group.
At the same time, it seemed like a lot of the mainstream rock and metal bands that had previously really only had a home at Cornerstone started to get picked up by the Warped Tour, and like even the smaller van bands were able to play clubs. Mm-hmm. And so back when I was a kid going to Cornerstone, that's the only place you were going to ever see a lot of those bands was Cornerstone. And all of a sudden you can see them in your own hometown.
They began to get booked at other festivals too. Bands that were exclusively at Cornerstone every year began to get invited to other Christian events. So you're right. You can see a lot of these bands without having to come to Cornerstone. I was constantly fussing with the Warped Tour. I was constantly, the Under Oaths and even the Reliant K's and the this and that. They were all, on the Warped Tour, and I had to negotiate with them to be able to get the band off the tour for, a weekend even, and then get them back in. And that became a constant. And sometimes the bands just couldn't get off, so they had to decide, do we play Cornerstone or do we do a whole summer of Warped Tour? 2001 was probably our biggest year. After that, I don't know if we ever totally collide. I think a couple things happened. Of course, one, 9/11 just, ruined a lot of things for a lot of America. But that was the year that we had so many people show up that we were not prepared with the amount. Our portable toilets, we had been limping along all those years by hiring a smaller portable toilet company. And as long as we hovered, in that 15 to 18,000, he seemed to handle it. But that one year we probably had about 30,000 people. It was kind of a nightmare. The portable toilets were nasty, and they weren't getting serviced as quickly as they should have been. After that, we went and hired a big company that does like mega events and brought in hundreds of toilets. But I think there were some people who never quite recovered from that. I mean, I had people years later tell me, oh yeah, and I never went back after that.
Yeah.
I think the first time I did a Cornerstone gig, I was like 18 or 19 with Adam again, and we probably consistently played like every other year for ages. Cornerstone's always one of our largest groups of people to play for and has become our core audience, our biggest supporters, our family.
Drag on the 575, I'm destitute and stranded. Sense to be made, I'm afraid. I need to understand it. Audience is big. You get a sideways quote. The reason all would demanded. It is what it is, what it is.
This is Randy Layton, and I just want to say that I have really fantastic memories of the Cornerstone Festival. One, it was an outreach of people that I loved very much, which was, Jesus People USA. Their ministry was always important to me, so when the festival came about, that was something that I was very much on board for. And over the years, I would go there in different capacities as a fan, but also as a label. The freedom that they allowed people in terms of expression, musically and otherwise, was always just endearing to me. I have two memories. One would be 1990, and that was the year of the great exit all-stars, So it was Charlie Peacock, Vector, Steve Scott, and the 77s, and there's Lori Norman as well, and so on. And it was just a fantastic night. And the other memory I have is probably the last one that I went to, and that was with DeGarmo & Key, Rez Band coming back, things like that. And it was just really, really special. So those are just little bits and pieces. I miss it terribly. I wish it was still with us, but you certainly are doing your part, John, to keep that memory alive, and I know we all appreciate that very much.
Jesus was a carpenter. He worked his hands in wood. He lived the perfect will of God. That is why we should see what God's done. Our God has come as man. He is God's son. He's a stranger in a strange land.
I have people ask me this, and I have for years, because of how closely associated I always was with the festival, why couldn't it have shrunk?
Maybe it could have. There are a couple things that converged at that point. No doubt. One was the fact that it had started losing money again. And even that last year when we trimmed the budget down, I still don't think it really broke even. And it was weighing on the community, the Jesus People community, to have to pick up the extras. To do a smaller version, we would have probably literally had to gone back to the idea of renting a grounds and then rented a place for $25,000 for the weekend. And I think that a lot of the core volunteers at Cornerstone were the Japusa people. We had hundreds of volunteers from all over the country. But the people who, ran registration, ran security, ran this tent, that tent, the art, the whatever, Cornerstone to them was always a mixed bag because it was a it was a work week. They didn't go and just hang out and enjoy concerts. A lot of them worked, long hours every day at the event. And after 27 years, they were kind of done with it. The community had felt like it had kind of run its course. There just wasn't the support from the community to reimagine it completely. And, I mean, there's a time for everything. I never envisioned that Cornerstone would last 50 years. I knew it was going to, especially that last 5-6 years, I knew we were on a kind of a countdown. The last year we ran Cornerstone, I came in, I think at the end of 2011 and said, I think it's time we pull the plug. We've had a good run. We've done 26 of these things here, and we've done some elsewhere. We did 5 in Florida, 2 in North Carolina, 1 in Los Angeles. Your big artist fees had grown from, $10,000 to $60,000 to $80,000. And, it wasn't sustainable. I had some young people on my staff who, said, hey, what if we gave it a shot? And I thought, well, maybe it's time for me to step down because, I had been the visionary behind this thing for a long time. In some ways, I had been able to grow it. When I took over, we had kind of doubled and tripled it. But then also in the end, maybe some of my wildness had, contributed to the demise of it. I don't know. I turned it over to some of the younger staff members and said, you know what, give it a go. Because I thought, well, maybe they can save it. I don't know. So that last year, it was fun in a lot of ways. We scaled down. We dropped the main stage. We cut the expenses. But still, after the year was over and we sat down and went through the books, it was obvious that it just wasn't sustainable, at least not there.
In that location,
what we had done. Yeah.
Today, looking at the landscape the way it is, whether it's the church culture landscape and the problems there, the general culture at large, what are some things that you would suggest are critical, important things to include when you're thinking about putting together an event like that? And what are some maybe warnings you would say, hey, avoid this?
I don't really know what's going on in the underground Christian music scene today, or if there is one. Yes. Young musicians today are more apt to really try their hand in the general market. And if you keep your head down a little bit, nobody's going to, maybe bite your head off for holding personal beliefs. I'd love to see something come again. I'm discouraged by the political discourse in this country. I felt that even that played some part in the end of Cornerstone, that the country was becoming more divided, and that evangelicalism had was becoming more conservative in some ways, and that there was this kind of a fight going on. I think that it's gotten just worse and worse and worse. I'd like to think that we could put those things aside and just get together and fellowship and have fun and enjoy great music. I don't know if I believe that you can always go back and recreate something. Maybe there'll have to just be something totally new.
Yeah, right.
In my years of being with Rez Band, I had seen quite a few fledgling attempts at Christian festivals or gatherings, whether they were weekend or overnight type deals or maybe just one-day events. And so many of them were done by people that just had so much passion, but they dreamed too big right away and they got in trouble financially. I saw a lot of, Christian promoters back in those days just lose their shirts. I mean, really nice people who literally had to sell their homes to pay off their debts. So I've always tried to encourage anybody who ever talked to me about events, and maybe this is just because I'm getting older, but to say, start it small and just see where it goes. Maybe it'll be something big, but the idea that you've got to risk so much one time and you're, even though you have the passion, it could be a big mistake.
Jesus told the truth, Jesus showed the way. There's one more thing I like to say. They nailed him to the cross and they laid him in the ground. They should have known you can't keep a good man down. I think of every day. I don't want to lose it. All I'm really trying to say is why should the devil have all the good music? I've been blessed in every way. Jesus didn't rock and roll my blues. Jesus didn't rock and roll my blues. Jesus didn't rock and roll my blues away.
Well, I tell you what, I would do it all again in a heartbeat. There's no doubt a little bit of me died when Cornerstone went away. I probably struggled with I had never even considered the idea of depression in my life. I had always had, between all the being with the band all the years in the community and the excitement of the festival, which I just loved every year. When those things kind of left my life, my kids were grown, I probably struggled with, I didn't even know it. My wife finally told me, I think you're depressed. And I'm like, really? And I thought, you know what? I think you're right. So I struggled for a couple of years to kind of find my footing in this world without, that opportunity to serve and do. But I'm in a good place today.
Thanks, Johnny. Going to step away for just a bit, but the Cornerstone commentary continues right after this.
Hello, my name's Rob, and I'm one of the Patreon backers of the True Tunes podcast. I'm honored to invite you to join me in support of True Tunes by signing up on their email list. I know email is often annoying, but by being on the list, I get notified when new episodes drop and when new articles get posted at truetunes.com. Sometimes, John even sends out short notes and gives away records and swag and stuff. Super cool. But really, the point is that by staying directly connected, I know that they don't have to pay Facebook or anyone else in order for me to hear from them, and that's important. They don't send out too many emails either, and I'm always happy to get them. So really, it would be helpful if you join me over here. You can find the sign-up link on the front page at truetunes.com. Oh, and don't forget to add John's email address, jjt@truetunes.com, to your contacts so that the emails don't get caught in your spam filter. And if you have any feedback on the show or questions, you can email him and he'll get back to you. Eventually. Thanks for listening.
And now, back to our exploration of the festival that changed everything for so many of us.
She's heard it said by the drone in her head that the wages of spend is debt. She figures that's better than nothing to show for the years of her tears and her sweat. She could put her hand on the brake of the land, find the trees and the diesel and the smoke. She would draw the teeth of the dull and the meek and feed them the truth until they choke. She's real.
As we got going on this show, Bruce pointed out that one person who really should be interviewed for it was, well, me. I hadn't thought of that, so Bruce grabbed the reins as we stepped into the interview suite, and he asked me some questions for a change.
First of all, let's see, you were 14 going on 15 at the first Cornerstone?
13 going on 14. It
13
was, because it
going
was
on
Cornerstone
14.
84, so I turned 14 July 7th, and the festival was like a few days before that.
Why Cornerstone? Did you have any knowledge of Christian rock at all?
Yes, because I started to go to these weird little Christian bookstores, which was the only place you could find a lot of this music. And there was one guy I had met named Mike Delaney, and he was the music buyer at a family bookstore kind of place, but he was really weird and really loved this kind of crazy music, and I just instantly loved him. Like, we were the same kind of person, and he could sense in me that we were kindred spirits in that way. And so he started feeding me the really obscure, oh, you got to check out this band, you got to check out this record, and his boss, I found out later, was this guy Russ Schwartz, who later became my sales rep for Word when I was the music buyer at Wheaton Religious and then at True Tunes. So those guys were at a Christian bookstore in Carroll Stream, which is one town north of Wheaton, and one of my youth leaders had an apartment right by the strip mall where their store was. So she could drive me over there, and I would haunt those guys and annoy them and listen to records in the store. And Mike actually set up a booth and sold some of his collection of strange, rare, imported indie underground music at Cornerstone. So I heard about stuff from him, and I heard about stuff. There was a radio station in Chicago called WCRM that started playing rock and alternative and metal stuff from 9 to midnight, and then on Saturdays they would do all requests, which tended to mostly be kids like me requesting bands like Jerusalem and Servant and even U2 and The Call and kind of mainstream groups that had a spiritual leaning. So I just happened to be in the Chicago suburbs where Paul Emery and Harvest Productions were bringing a lot of these bands to have concerts. WCRM was a radio station that was playing a lot of this music that in a lot of cities weren't playing. And Jesus People, the community, was there, and they started to put this festival together. So I heard about all of that stuff as a kid in the suburbs, and I'd heard about the festival before it happened because I had just gone to see Rez Band for the first time. I saw them play with Steve Taylor, and they had started to kind of get the word out that this thing was coming, this festival was coming. Cornerstone was like this beacon, and all I could get to was one day, the Saturday I think it was, and that was really where my life was completely set on a different path.
To me, Cornerstone has always been sort of a mythic thing in music. You grow up hearing about Cornerstone and how amazing it is, and all these bands, that's got their start here, and just people always talk about it. So it's had a huge impact in Christian music and probably music in general.
So you came back from the first fest. Did you go to work for Wheaton Religious right away?
No, I didn't. I did come home and start writing this thing that later somebody called my manifesto. It was, and I wrote in a notebook sort of what I thought needed to happen in order for bands like 77s to be famous. It's kind of like what a teenage kid would think. Okay, there has to be a radio station, there has to be a concert venue, I just kind of did a bunch of research. And then I won tickets to the next year's Cornerstone, the 85. I won full event ticket for free by beating Glenn Kaiser at Rez Band Trivia on WCRM as a call-in, competition thing, which was hilarious and perfect. And then in the process of that, I had a ticket, but no way to get there. So I called Chapusa, and I said, hey, I'm a teenage kid in the suburbs. I've got a ticket. I need to find a youth group. I'll join a church if it means that they'll take me to this thing. Like, I just need to find a youth group. And so they actually went through their group sales thing, and they found a group from Wheaton, some guy that had bought 50 tickets or 30 tickets or something. And they said, well, here's a name. And they gave me a name and a phone number of some total stranger. And I called the guy, and his name was Matt Wilgus. And he and this group of college students were going. And so I said, well, maybe I could go with you guys. And he had also won a ticket from the same radio station. So he offered to give me a ride, and we would go together up to the radio station to pick up our tickets. And in the process of that ride, he just got to know me and how obsessive I was about this music, how much I'd already learned at just, at that point, 15 years old. And he knew that he was going to be going off to college soon. And he said, hey, I'm the music buyer at this bookstore in Wheaton, and I take care of the music, but I also do all this other stuff. And when I go off to college, would you be interested in taking my job? So going up to the radio station to get our Cornerstone tickets and back, we became friends. We could tell that, this was a connection. And then I had to talk my parents into letting me go to this festival with a group of complete strangers. And so they went and met Matt and interviewed him and kind of got the feeling that he was a good guy and that these charismatic Catholic people were pretty cool. And so they somehow, I think it was supernatural, they said, yeah, we'll let our son go to this crazy rock festival with a bunch of strangers. And over the span of that time, then it was the following summer in 86 when I turned 16 that Matt finally was transitioning off to go to college. I took his job at Wheaton Religious, and that was what led to True Tunes. But it all was centered out of people I met at or around Cornerstone.
Cornerstone to me is like a place where you can come and really be and feel like you're part of like the body of Christ outside of the church walls, where there's no judgment, no condemnation, and I don't know, it's just like completely, I've built relationships here that with people that have lasted from past Cornerstone, like during the year, and it just, I don't know, it just blows my mind just the way God moves in this place. And I just, because like everybody's uninhibited, everybody's just smelly, nasty, sweaty, like nobody's caring like what they look like or anything like that. And it just really breaks down those walls that are outside of the festival where, people just don't interact with each other that way. And I think that that's just definitely something that we as believers like really need to be transparent the way we are in this festival outside, so then non-believers see that and then will really see the truth and love of Christ.
After the second year, you were feeling like you needed to create some sort of community that would sustain you from year to year, because there wasn't anything else going on in your area that was anything like the Cornerstone Festival.
Exactly. It was interesting. I met these people because I went to the festival with this group I didn't know. And I had such an amazing experience, not just the music. The music was incredible, but then I met people that became like family to me. It was so powerful. And in this environment, I found people that I could really open up with. And I formed some very deep friendships, several of which I still have to this day. And when it was over, at the last day, and we were all leaving, it was devastating. None of us wanted to go. So we were slow in packing up our stuff. And then we said, well, let's go to Lake Michigan, because this is when the festival was still in the north, kind of the north suburbs of Chicago. So we went to Lake Michigan and we just hung out by the beach and made sandcastles. And I remember Matt made this big kind of Holy Spirit fish shape in the sand, and we were just playing in the sand. Then we went to a Denny's or some kind of diner to get food, and the whole place was full of people that had just left Cornerstone. You could tell, I mean, filthy, scuzzy looking, strung out, people. And it was, you could just tell. And we walked in, it was like, hey, we're all here. We don't want to go home. Like this buzz was just palpable. And so the spirit of that meant that we were all just hopping table to table, and who are you, and who are you, and where do you live, and here's my phone number. And there's no email at this point. There's no social media. There's no way that we're going to keep in touch unless we actually find out how to write people letters. But I said, man, there's got to be a way that this community could stay connected. And I saw, in having done some of this research, that magazines were a big part of that. That was how the counterculture in the 60s had connected, was through magazines like Rolling Stone and Cream and activist magazines around issues. So Cornerstone had done that. Cornerstone, the name, the festival was based on Cornerstone magazine, which had its roots in the counterculture of the Jesus movement. And I thought, maybe my generation needs a new way of talking and thinking about music, that we could kind of use that as a gathering point. So the idea for True Tunes was we could keep the Cornerstone buzz going all year with a subset of that, a gathering point. The thing about Cornerstone was I was positive that I could bring anybody from my high school to that festival, and it didn't matter what their beliefs were. It didn't matter what kind of music they liked. Anybody would feel like Cornerstone was cool. And then because of that, we could hang out and we could talk about anything. And as I talked to artists, I found out that there was one that they all mentioned, not all, several mentioned Greenbelt in England as something that was similar to Cornerstone. And I heard about one called Black Stump in Australia that was kind of a similar sort of DNA. I got to know Henry Wong, and Henry was the original director of Cornerstone. And so I probably started to get to know Henry around the time I was 16, when I started to be the music buyer at that bookstore. And so I had gotten to know Henry through that. And by the time I went to launch True Tunes in 89, I launched it by going to Henry and saying, hey, I'd like to really take over the music sales at the festival, and I'll create a store, and I'll just give you guys the profits. I'll take a little percentage and give everything else to you guys, because I know that this is how I'm going to launch True Tunes. And he agreed. So there was Harvest Rock Syndicate in Chicago. There was Harvest Productions bringing in bands. There was this radio station. There was Japusa, and it was all just kind of this soup. And I was just this kid kind of soaking it up.
When your lover's in a dangerous time, sometimes you make them feel as if you lost cry. Nothing worth having comes without some kind of fight. Got a kick in the darkness till it bleeds their light. When your lover's in a dangerous time.
I grew up in this little community that was able to come together, and it was so tiny. And when we got to come to Cornerstone, it just kind of ballooned. Everyone from all over these little tiny towns, these small churches, these little youth groups came together and were able to be this big, solid family. And all of a sudden, I felt like I wasn't so alone anymore, that I wasn't the only one that was a Christian in my high school. It meant the world to me that there were people that were making music that loved the things that I loved. And it formed a direction and a path in my life that I wouldn't have been able to find any other way.
What do you think caused the festival to start skewing more and more towards alternative? Because in the beginning, I was going back and I was researching, looking for video, and the early festivals, yeah, there was DA, there was 77s, Carrie Livgren, but then there was also Margaret Becker and Russ Taff and people like that. Was it just a question of there not being enough alternative acts to book, or did they just not know that something like Cornerstone was out there?
First, I think the festival had only about 15 or 20 slots the first year or two, because it was 2.5 days long instead of 4 days. And there was the main stage, and then there was the evening encore, and the evening encore also had acts in the afternoon. I do think when you look back at what the supply side was when it comes to how many artists fit the bill for what Cornerstone would want to be, and it was eclectic. They would have, a couple of mainstream Christian artists, although I think even by those standards, a Margaret Becker or a Leslie Phillips, by Cornerstone standards, were fairly mainstream, but by CCM standards were pretty left edge. Like, they were rock, they were, to the Christian bookstore scene, they were on the left side of things. To Cornerstone world, they were on the conservative side, But then you had Bob Bennett and people like that came from the Jesus movement that were playing that acoustic stage. But you also had, I remember seeing Reverend Milton Brunson and the Thompson Community Singers, a full-blown black gospel choir from Chicago at one of those early years, and it just was incredible. I loved that kind of music, but I never, to see Cornerstone invest in bringing a full-blown gospel choir was huge to me. This was punk, heavy metal, pop, singer-songwriter, gospel. They were making space intentionally for stuff, even if most of the people kind of would have been happy with just a narrower slice of that. Cornerstone was kind of pushing us to hear things wider than what we even knew we needed to be hearing. And I think that that's where like a Charlie Peacock comes in. And Charlie Peacock, if you strictly listen to the music, was very pop. That was not alternative music. It was just great pop music. But it was so good. It was so well done. And the audience at Cornerstone had developed an appetite for appreciating quality, not just stuff being weird or stuff being loud or stuff being extreme. And so I think that was why, as there was more stages and more slots, you started to see some respect for some of the mainstream stuff. A Rich Mullins, somebody like that would find a lot of traction at a place like Cornerstone.
I will be my brother's keeper, not the one who judges him. Won't despise him for his weakness, won't regard him for his strength. I won't take away his freedom, I will help him learn to stand. And I will be my brother's keeper.
Honestly, I think that Cornerstone is really all about friendship to me. It's the one time of year that all my friends come together, touring bands, people from other places all around the country, and we all get to hang out for a week and just, make new friends and have old friends around too.
Now, in the 90s, when they moved to Central Illinois, and they've got many more stages, and they've got a whole city that kind of springs up around this stuff, that's when you see the addition of a whole day for tooth and nail stuff. You also, if you look at the industry back then, you see this explosion of indie alternative stuff, and that becomes a draw for a lot of kids. They're not interested now in the mainstream stuff. They're interested in the skater punk and all that kind of stuff. So I do think that there, in the 90s, as it grew, there was a little bit less of that. We're all here to listen to everything, and we're going to all go to all the shows. And it became a little bit more like, okay, now there's the gallery stage for these people and the underground stage for these people and the main stage for these people. And there's some folks that just, they would stay in one place the whole time, and it lost some of that magic of those early years, of the serendipity of just hearing something that you didn't even know you were going to like.
first year that Cornerstone moved to Bushnell, Illinois. So when I got to Peoria, I realized that Cornerstone wasn't really in Peoria. I wasn't very organized. So I actually hitchhiked down to Bushnell. When I went there, I was mostly interested in eventually starting a radio station. But when I got there, I just couldn't believe how many cool bands there were and how many people were Christian, wanted to create music that was relevant and, you know, what was going on in the mainstream. And I was literally blown away by it. So I came back thinking, you know, I want to do a label that wants to support some of these bands. I honestly think if it wasn't for Cornerstone, I don't even know if Tooth and Nail would ever come into existence. I mean, God can do what he wants, but I feel like he used Cornerstone to inspire me to even do a record company.
When did you take on consulting and working with the festival through the whole year?
True Tunes was purchased by another company in late 95, and they had plans to expand it and franchise it and expand the magazine, but within a year, all of that had changed to we're going to close everything down except truetunes.com, and they were going to launch the website. And the store started to close, and by late 97 into 98, everything that was True Tunes was gone except for truetunes.com. I was kind of in a panic because I didn't really know how to do anything else. You know, I'd had offers to go to Nashville and work for record companies that I had just never even taken seriously. But it was really eating at me. I was not in a good place. I was very frustrated with how the whole thing had gone down. I was really disappointed because I had lost control. I was an emotional wreck, and my wife and I, the Wayside, you know, sort of an acoustic version, we did a show with Glenn Kaiser, and Glenn ended up, and Wendy was there as well, and they ended up spending the night after the show at our house. And he could tell, he knew me well enough, he could tell that something was wrong, and I told him what was going on. The next day, he went back downtown to Japusa and had a pastor's meeting, and he was a little bit late for it. Turns out he had just missed, by being late, he had just missed that John Herron, who, the former drummer, you know, who we've been talking about, who was the director of the festival, had just told the board he needed help with the festival. He said that they finally had enough in the budget to hire somebody. He didn't think they had anybody in the community that was really who they needed. They needed to look outside of the community to find somebody that understood the music business, that understood marketing, that understood the artists and all that kind of stuff. And from what I heard, he said something like, you know, we need somebody like John Thompson, but clearly we couldn't get John, you know, and Glenn walks in and he's like, hey guys, could we pray really quick? Because John Thompson really needs work. And they were like, what? Like, John had just told us this. So then when I got into the office, I had a fax, a page, and an email from John Herron saying, please call me right away. Before Christmas break even happened, we figured out a way for me to come on staff as sort of a director of communications and marketing, and I just helped with all kinds of stuff, from being the host of the main stage and the MC to helping with booking to helping with how the industry partnered with, how the festival partnered with the industry, finding, you know, sponsors and things like that, to how, you know, getting a big video screen paid for and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, and I was basically full time for several years. And then even after those years, I still stayed on staff.
Thank you very much. It's great to be back here. Be a friend, make a friend. This song is called It Could Be a Whole Lot Worse. Hey! Kiss for the miles to drive, prayer for when it rains. One shot of perspective, couple more to kill the pain. When all the best metaphors are hitting too close to home. When all the best metaphors are bleeding from your bones. Hey, I'm gonna die a failure, but to happiness awake. You can make your bed in hell and wake up at heaven's gate. Think of all that we missed today that lay right before our eyes. Think of all that fades away in that hard-pressed top of my eye. Man, this is dangerous terrain we're attempting to traverse. It's a crying shame, but it could be a lot worse.
Hey, this is Todd Zeller. I had the great experience of 3 Cornerstones, 1994, 2000, and 2001. Really, the greatest memory was meeting Gene face-to-face for the first time, of Adam Again and the Lost Dogs. I met him at the merch table, which was just awesome. I had told him that I was from California, and we had literally just moved to Nashville the day before. Unpacked our U-Haul, and then drove from Nashville to Cornerstone and met 2 friends there who were traveling from South Carolina. Meeting Gene and talking about how much I loved what he was doing with the Lost Dogs, especially the song Eleanor, It's Raining Now. He actually said, "Hey, do you have your camera with you? Let's go out and shoot something while the dogs are all here." And, I somewhat scoffed, like, come on, I've got a VHS camera. It's a piece of junk, and I just couldn't see it. But he was really gracious and made me laugh, and we talked about the Lost Dogs music and, of course, Adam Again, and all of his work down at the Green Room. So that's a special memory for me. But Cornerstone as a whole, I was blown away at the music, the art, the speakers and special lecturers. What I really was drawn to probably overall was, of course, the music, but I really did appreciate sort of the hippie vibe, the dirt, the grime, the stench. Thanks, John, and thanks, Cornerstone. We miss you.
Evolutionists, creationists, perverts, slumlords, deadbeats, athletes, Protestants and Catholics, housewives, neophytes, pro-choice, pro-life, misogynists, monogamists, philanthropists, black and whites. Breathe deep the breath of God. Breathe deep the breath of God. Sex offenders, tax collectors, war vets, rejects, atheists, scientists, racists, sadists, photographers, biographers, artists, pornographers. Breathe deep the breath of God.
You and John talk about this a lot, and we've talked in the past about the way the festival had to reinvent itself after touring basically shut down in the post 9/11 era. So how did the festival respond to that? How did they keep things going?
I don't know that there was ever an actual cogent response. I think there was a lot of instinctive reactions, and some of them were, well, this band is going to cost $90,000 now because they're just that big and that's what the market will bear, and we just have to have them, so we'll pony up and pay that kind of money. Then there were other times where it's like, well, this artist, it's going to cost us $2,500, and we don't know how many people still really care, but we do. Maybe this particular artist is a risk. There's some things that might go sideways by having this person around, but we love this artist, and we part of the family, and so we're going to keep investing and supporting that. And the decisions about who was playing at Cornerstone were, very few of them were marketing based. It was a lot more relationally based. There were a handful that would say, okay, well, we want to have a few of the names so that the youth leaders will bring their kids, we want to have a few of those things. But there was not an awareness of how fundamentally things were changing. And the artists, I think also, some of them that were really key to that side of the festival's success didn't understand that by saying yes to competing Christian festivals and saying yes to things like Warped Tour, they were eventually going to undermine the thing that had really gotten them there in the first place. And we saw the same thing happen in terms of industry when Walmart and Target and mainstream record stores started selling the music that had previously only been available through these kind of mom and pop Christian bookstores. Most of those mom and pop Christian bookstores eventually went out of business. And now you have to buy everything on Amazon. When you live and die by the power of economics and free markets, then there's a lot more dying than there is living. And so it's exciting at the time that you feel like, oh, wow, this growth is explosive and really cool, and we're just going to say yes to all of the growth. But sometimes you got to think about what are the costs on the other end. And the thing that made Cornerstone really different was that they really didn't care about making money. That wasn't their goal. And if they were, then they would have made some different choices. And I think it reveals the unavoidable demise of something that big, reveals an underlying thing that I've been thinking about, writing about, talking about, obsessing over ever since it happened and shortly before, which is what are our blind spots when it comes to allowing something so important to us to get so big that it's going to crush us. It's in one way or another. It cannot survive. And I think that John, when he talks about the fact that the overhead that it cost to maintain that property meant that it was impossible for them to rein it back to whatever the right scale would have been. Because that scale would not have, there's no way for that level to have sustained the cost of maintaining that property. That's just an economic reality. So if that had been understood 10 years earlier, then maybe they could have divested themselves of that property and moved the thing back to Chicago or something like that and made it a smaller event. But when we borrow definitions of success from the sort of institutional side of things, the commercial side of things, and apply them to the spiritual human side of things, then we're like, oh, well, the only way for this thing to be a success is for it to be big. And then sometimes, it gets its own sense of momentum, and we just can't go backwards. We can't undo what we've done. It just has to go away. And then we have to think, well, where do we go from here? What have we learned? And if we go and do something again, what do we do differently? How can we possibly, become more mindful of these things so that next time we don't make those same mistakes? And I think a lot of artists are doing that now, as some of them who had big record deals, they had huge tours, they spent a lot of money, and now they're out there going, okay, well, we're going to pull this all in a little bit. We're going to make this more about how we connect with the fans and what, where are we spending our money and what really matters about this show and what doesn't. And you see that kind of happening on that level. And I think that I'm thinking about that and across my life. What's the right size for something to be, for it to really be healthy and functional?
With everything you got, with everything you are, with everything he wants me to be. 'Cause now that I know you, I can never turn my back away. And now that I see you, I can never look away. 'Cause now that I know you, I could never turn my back away. And now that I see you, woman, you will leave me back. I feel so alive, singing. When I can't deny it, I feel so alive, 'cause I feel so alive.
Hey, this is Garrett Godfrey with some memories about Cornerstone. Obviously, the incredible breadth of bands that you could see at Cornerstone, bands that probably would never come to your hometown, was spectacular. Big name bands, but also tons of small, underground, unsigned bands. All of the generator stages and small stages were incredible. The other thing that really stood out to me, though, were all of the chance encounters, like running into the guys from Dietophobia who had just on their drive to Cornerstone decided to change their name from Donderfliegen, and I actually bought their cassette of really early style industrial music from them. There's like 250 in the world, and I bought it at Cornerstone from the band. I heard this music coming from a boombox in one of the tents, and was mesmerized, and it was the trip-hop of Paradigm Shift before they'd ever been picked up by InSoul, and I was able to buy their 4-song CD from the band. Those kind of encounters you just didn't get anywhere else, and I loved that.
Why not just hand it off to somebody like AudioFeed?
I honestly think that one of the things that probably hinders an event like AudioFeed most is the shadow of that hugeness of Cornerstone that it's forming under. And so the mothership was so big and so impactful in different ways that it's almost impossible not to compare something so close to it. And then those comparisons lead people, if you're not careful in the values you're comparing, to think, well, this is a failure, or this is smaller, or this is puny, or this is whatever. It's not fill in the blank. It's not. And so that's what I mean by being careful about how we define success. And I think that there were certain people that just were like, we are not. It's like the early versions of AudioFeed reminded me of me at 15 with all those people at the Denny's after going to the beach going, we just can't let it go. We can't let it go. We got to do something. But the challenge is to say, well, what does this thing need to be? What can it be? What should it be? Versus what is this compared to something from the past, from 10 years ago and farther? And can we evaluate this on its own merits and say, this is what this thing should be and can be, and it's beautiful in its own right? And that is really hard for us to do. It was hard even for Cornerstone to do when the Cornerstone 2012 version of itself had to compare itself to Cornerstone 2001 version of itself. And it was feeling like, oh man, this is feeling kind of puny or something. And then some of us were going, no, this feels great because it feels like the Cornerstone 98 or 91 version of itself,
right.
Like this is, but man, this is the challenge. And so I think sometimes telling the old stories is really valuable, and hearing this stuff is really important. But now what we got to do is look forward and say, okay, well, let's disabuse ourselves of all of the previous things and imagine what do we need to do now? And I think even at the last festival, I said some things. I was challenging people to take this frustration and go do something, kind of like when I was 15 and I'm like, I'm going to go home and I'm not satisfied to only have Cornerstone once a year. I want to have it all the time. So I went and started something. I wanted people to go take the spirit of what that was to Omaha and to Florida and to California and to Indiana and wherever they were, and to do it, whether that, it didn't have to be something huge. It just needed to be something. And I think that that's somewhat what AudioFeed is, and I think that's also what Furnace Fest is. Mm-hmm. It's bigger. It's a different subset of music, but I think that's what that is as well. And I've heard of other things, but it's just we're not. Anything that compares itself back to this original mothership is going to suffer.
Cornerstone for me, it's always been a place for me to meet new people who are doing interesting things and trying to live their lives and kind of go in a similar direction. I always see friends here. I really feel like this has become kind of maybe like a New Year's for me in some ways, and it's meant a lot to me over the years, and I'm gonna miss this thing pretty sincerely. But I think God has other things in the works, and I'm sure there's a reason for all this, and I'm kind of excited to see what's next. But it's definitely a bittersweet thing for me.
I'm thinking about you. You're always on my mind. I'm crying tears for you. All things revealed in time.
What are some of the other early moments that sort of sustained you for the calendar year?
I think I talked about one also in our very first episode with Charlie Peacock. His acoustic trio set in, I think it was 90, was unbelievable. It still ranks as one of the most incredible concerts I've ever seen. Just tears through probably a third of the show. And I was going through a pretty big crisis in my mind because I had launched True Tunes, which in my mind, it was going to be a side thing. Like my music as an artist was the primary focus. And then True Tunes was going to be the day job that was going to sustain what I was going to do creatively as a songwriter and an artist. So that was one, because now I was sensing, I'm like, oh no, I've just kneecapped myself. Like this thing is going to grow much faster than my music is. And I also had a girl that I was crazy about, and I felt hopeless about, like, because she was connected to this other guy who was not treating her well, and I thought this is just not going to work out, and so I didn't know what to do about that. And I'm listening to Charlie's songs, and it's just crushing me. And I talked to him at one point, and he said, "Hey, after the show, come to the hotel. Let's talk after the show." So I drove over to his hotel and waited, and at about 4 a.m, we finally sat by the pool, and I just gushed all these problems I was dealing with. And not only had I seen a show that was one of the most important shows of my life because it stripped this music down to just an acoustic guitar, a couple songs with Mike Rowe playing electric guitar, vocal harmonies, and just hearing the essence of songs. It was so important for me to have heard that. So informative. And then to have that guy sit with me next to a pool in the middle of the night and let me bare my soul with all these teenage problems, and honor that, have him honor it at a level that I did not deserve, and give me some advice where he said, whatever door opens, just walk through it with integrity and do your best, whether that's professionally or even personally. You don't know what's going on with this person, so just love her, respect her, treat her as best you can, and just trust that things will work out. And don't worry, don't borrow problems from the future. He was basically saying, man, just relax. just chill, kid, and that was something about Cornerstone that was completely unique. The artists were right there with everybody. And that was something I learned from, and I did all the time. Like I would make myself as available as I possibly could. I never considered myself to be on any kind of pedestal. I know I wasn't. I was just another fan like everybody else. But anybody that wanted to talk about anything, I knew, who knows what this might mean to this person, because it had meant so much to me when I was at that point. We all year long were kind of alone. Most of us were kind of now I was a little different because a lot of people would come and see me because they were playing at the club or we were hanging out at True Tunes. But a lot of these artists, they didn't get that kind of fraternity feeling the rest of the year. And so Cornerstone was not only a chance for them to connect with their fans, who were increasingly becoming more familiar, like friends, but also other artists and people, dorks like me. It was definitely a family reunion kind of vibe. I was surprised at the last 10 years or so at the small percentage of the relative crowd that actually engaged in the seminars. It was still, some of them were fairly well attended, but when you have 25,000 people at the festival, those seminars should have been, every tent should have been overflowing, and they weren't. And I think that early on, it was kind of like you were pretty much going to at least one seminar every day. Everybody kind of went to the seminars. And I think everybody sort of understood that there was a value. We needed to take advantage of the fact that we had access to these teachers at this thing. The 90s generation, I don't think saw that. They might have flocked to some controversial speakers. I remember Jay Baker when he came, who was wonderful. I really enjoyed what he had to say, but it was mostly the controversy that drew people. I remember David Dark coming and doing a really cool seminar about the theology of The Simpsons, and a title like that would be really curious, and it would draw a crowd like, what? That's the theology of The Simpsons. And that was great, and I'm glad that people would come. But they needed to be there for all of that stuff. And it felt to me towards the end that the crowd, a big chunk of whatever the larger part of that crowd is, was not really recognizing the importance of learning. And the seminars, what we ended up calling Cornerstone University, man, we had 300 hours of seminars, something like 20, 25 different venues. That would have been a conference today. If it was just the teaching, it would be one of the most significant teaching events in all of the world without a single band playing. And a lot of the fans just really neglected that towards the end, and that was a real tragedy. And I think that had more of them not been neglecting that, they might have developed a taste for learning that would have been good, because it might have helped enhance some of the discernment that a lot of them would have needed over the last few years.
Bumps at night, streams of light, remind you that the end is near. Stomach lurches on the thought that the clouds you see ain't ever clearing. Hope the daylight comes someday, helps you drive the shadows away like a bad memory. Oh, this is the moment you have sought. Try to steal a future that was bought, paid for by a phantom who's as real as the night is long. Sad is the day when you tell your own soul so long. I hate to sound intrusive, but I wonder what you think you're doing.
Thank you, guys. I want to say, 29 years is a long time for something to go on, and there's so many memories. When I found out this was the last one, I cried, and I was kind of in shock. This is our home. Just thinking about all the people we met, all of the bands that have got to start here and to have careers, because Cornerstone and Glenn and Wendy and John were kind enough to, and had the vision enough to start this wonderful, wonderful thing. My son graduated high school this year, and I went to his graduation, and he went to a really small school that was, for kids that just didn't really fit in big public schools. And it was a public school, but it was a real small class size, and a lot of, what you call misfits. And the girl that gave the valedictorian speech, she got up, and her speech was called The Island of Misfit Toys. And she talked about how that place was a very safe haven for kids like them, and that they finally found a place they belonged. I started thinking about this place, and this is kind of like the Island of Misfit Toys also. It's a place where rich, poor, street people, people who are comfortable, nerds, cool people, goth, quirky people, we can be here, and we can share each other's faith, our wins, our losses, and without fear. And as a band, we've been able to play here many, many times, and through all of our phases, through whatever was going on in our personal lives, whatever was going on in our band situations, the good and the bad, Cornerstone, they never judged us. They just loved us and brought us back and let us play and kept encouraging us. And I just cannot thank them enough for giving us a safe haven to grow up in, and for our kids to grow up in. And I hope that someday we can find something else as wonderful as this. I'm not sure we can, but I hope that at some point something else will crop up, because this has been a wonderful, wonderful ride. So thanks, Cornerstone. Thanks, Jakuza, for doing this.
What was the last evening like?
Man, it was hard. The choir was the first band to play the first day of the first Cornerstone in '84 as youth choir. And that last day, it was heavy. It was like being at a funeral or something most of the day, or it was hard to explain. I've never experienced anything like it for sure. And I could barely look people in the eyes. I was exhausted from it by the end of the day. And I also was kind of, I think, in some ways, John and some of the other people were glad to have me be the MC as much as possible, because I could absorb the stuff that they didn't want to at sometimes. Like, I just threw myself into it to be sort of the buffer for the crowd, and I was completely spent by the end of that. We did a communion service, we did a prayer time, we did several ceremonial things throughout the day, and then it was this kind of final farewell, this commission, and there's no way to really prepare for that experience until it happens.
Away we go again, too early in the morning. Just one more thought of three before I say goodbye. Insurance policies are in the second drawer, so listen close for one last sad sigh, for the words I never would say if I were to bid farewell, my love, today. Glad sigh for the promise of a new day. If I were to bid farewell and fly away, I've sung 1,000 songs, give or take 400. Tried to ride the clouds, I know you came along. I feel some turbulence now, and if this were farewell, friend, would you hear one final sad song for the songs I never would sing? If I were to bid farewell, the word today, a glad song as the bells beyond the night ring. And though I walked beneath the moon, the sun was in my eyes. For this is not a sorry tune, and heaven help me, a sad sigh. For the words I never would say if I were to bid farewell to you today. A glad sigh for the promise of a new day. If I were to bid farewell and fly away, a sad song for the songs I never would sing. If I were to bid farewell to you today, a glad song as the bells beyond the night ring. If I were to bid farewell and fade away, if I were to bid farewell and fade away, if I were to bid farewell, fade away. God bless you guys. Good night.
The weird thing was, like, the next day, you know, the sun comes up and life goes on, and you're like, wait, I'm supposed to live now? Like, I'm supposed to, like, we're supposed to actually function? And I had to go back out to the grounds to pick up some things and you know, pack up the van. And that last trip was even harder in some ways, because I think it was just me and the kids and Michelle. And I think going back in the morning was like, oh, wait, I definitely felt like, well, something else is going to happen. At this point, we had already moved to Nashville about 5 years earlier. So I had already experienced the sense of transition, that when one part of your life ends, something else starts. But I did have this feeling like, okay, this has to end. Okay, what has to continue? Something has to continue. And I'm here for a reason. Like, I don't feel like that there's just an accident. And so I started right away not thinking, okay, we have to bring this back. And that was probably why I resisted some of the online stuff and some of the clamoring about save it and whatever. It's like, no, let's let this thing go. But the spirit of it, what are the critical elements that really are important? Let's identify those, and let's let ourselves feel hungry for those things again. And then let's pursue that hunger in a new way, because that hunger is not going anywhere.
Amen. Good night.
If the soapbox I pull out at the end of these podcast episodes was actually a soapbox, it would no doubt be covered in stickers given to me by bands that I met at Cornerstone. This soapbox is really an extension of the passion, mission, and purpose that got under my skin all those years ago as I sat on a cinder block, almost 14 years old, listening to Glenn Kaiser teach about music, musicians, and ministry in a shed on a hot afternoon. Cornerstone. From the epic main stage concerts to the intimate gallery stage moments to the controversial seminars and heated debates conducted right outside of striped circus tents, from the bliss of the first cool breeze of the evening, the smell of the funnel cakes and the sound of Over the Rhine, to the knot I felt form in my gut every time a mosh pit had to be stopped so some injured kid could be attended to. From the tear-soaked memorial shows for fallen friends to the joy of marriages, proposals, and little green mohawked babies being pulled in wagons, the whole thing absolutely ruined me, and maybe you, for anything resembling safe, predictable, normal, faith-based music or Christian subculture. This soapbox is built, in so many ways, out of the words, the prayers, the ideas, the joys, and the failures that an insane, impossible, irresponsible gathering built in my heart and mind. I think it's important to consider what made something like Cornerstone possible and what made it so powerful. And while we're at it, why is it that so many of us feel such a hunger for an event that was so inconvenient, uncomfortable, unpredictable, and even unsafe? First, I think we must remember that Cornerstone could only be as radical and revolutionary as it was because it was birthed by a community of people who were moved by mission and not market. There was no profit motive here. Actually, there was almost an aversion to profit. Whenever I saw the organizers actually make a little bit of money on the event, it was immediately followed by questions about how they could make the experience better for the crowd. The decisions the organizers of Cornerstone made, for better or worse, were oriented around their purpose, and that purpose was to spark community, deepen relationships, spark imaginations, and to welcome people into the kind of upside-down kingdom kind of love living that they had experienced. That's what made the event more than a festival. The world is full of festivals today, and most of them feel more like Walmart than Woodstock. Today's festivals are often expensive, highly curated ways to hear short sets by dozens of artists in a couple of days. Cornerstone, on the other hand, was more like a musical and spiritual chemistry experiment. Thousands of people showed up on a piece of land with instruments, some stages, some electricity, and a sense of shared vision. We may have had a few artists that we were super excited to see, but we would always end up finding new things to love, and the fans were as much a part of the creativity as the bands. Not unlike cosplayers dressing up for a Comic-Con, the crowd at Cornerstone was part of the experience. They built it. From their crazy outfits to the generator stages to the mosh pits to the art gallery, the whole thing was like one big sloppy group art project. Today, as we consume music on our personal devices played through our earbuds, and we get most of our information from within individual silos, we need things like Cornerstone to break us out of those ruts. We need people to get up in our space, to offend us, to stop by our campsite and ask for a sandwich or some deodorant. If you were there, we need your help to keep that spirit alive in this toxic world. Please don't forget. If you were not there, but you feel hungry for the kind of gritty, challenging, soulful music and conversation that will actually satisfy you in the deepest of ways, that will help you become and remain connected to your diverse, difficult, and doubtful neighbor, then I invite you to stay connected with us here as we continue on this journey. No, listening to a podcast, participating in a social media group, and reading emails from a list is not the same thing as being at a festival, but it's a start. This month also marks 3 years since we relaunched this version of True Tunes, this podcast, this virtual festival of conversations and songs. Bruce and I have so enjoyed digging in this dirt, listening for the deeper sounds. If you were a part of the Cornerstone experience, I hope you feel its spirit in what we're doing here. If you were not, though, I hope this trip through our bizarre family album might provide some perspective on what it is we have been trying to accomplish here. Because, to be honest, I don't think we've even scratched the surface yet. Okay, I'm climbing off my soapbox now. I noticed a spot on it where I just might be able to fit this Dead Artist Syndrome sticker. That's going to do it for this episode of the True Tunes podcast. Thank you so much for listening. To all of the fans and friends who posted great clips online, thanks. This is certainly not a definitive history of the festival, and in no way a suggestion that these were its best moments even. With over 250,000 people attending over nearly 3 decades, that would have been impossible. We have tried to convey a sense of what made the festival so special, though, and what we might want to carry forward of its legacy. And if all this talk of festivals has you itching to get outside, meet some new people, and hear some lovely music, you really need to check out Over the Rhine's Nowhere Else Festival, coming to Clinton County, about 45 miles east of Cincinnati this Labor Day weekend. They have assembled an incredible lineup, of course, including Hayes Carl, Courtney Marie Andrews, John Fulbright, Iris Dement, Carolina Story, The Wine Tree, and others. You can learn more and order your tickets at nowhereelsefestival.com, and I will see you there. For those of you whose tastes run a bit more toward the hard rock, metal, and punk side of things, you'll want to seriously consider being at Furnace Fest in Birmingham, Alabama, September 23rd through the 25th, where Sunny Day Real Estate, Thrice, Manchester Orchestra, Alex is on Fire, The Ghost Inside, Mastodon, Descendants, Maylene and the Sons of Disaster, Demon Hunter, and so many others will be playing. Hit up furnacefest.us for all those details. We'll have links to those events, the Cornerstone documentary I made with my friend Jeremy Godowskis, and a list of at least some of the music we used, and a massive Cornerstone Jukebox Spotify mix on the show notes page for this episode, so don't miss that. Also, please take a few minutes to sign up for our email list, rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, find and follow us on Facebook at True Tunes Now, and if you've been thinking about joining our group of Patreon supporters, now would be a great time to do so. To all of you who have already done all of those things, thanks. This podcast was produced by me, JJT, and Bruce A. Brown for Gyroscope Productions. The contents of this program are protected by U.S. copyright law and are the intellectual property of Gyroscope Productions, with the exception of songs or clips that are from previously copywritten materials. Everything on this episode is used by permission or under fair use provisions. This program is intended for the private use of our listening audience. Gyroscope Productions can be reached at jjt@truetunes.com or P.O. Box 60401, Nashville, Tennessee 37206. Until next time, this is JJT reminding you to stay hydrated, use your sunscreen, don't stand too close to the speakers, and make sure to eat something healthy today. Oh, and if you have a golf cart, remember not to drive it recklessly. And if someone is missing an orange plaid sofa, we found it in the middle of Lake Wildwood on fire. Peace.
wouldn't watch a movie at a music festival? I don't understand that. Well, that was the great thing about Cornerstone is it was a home for those of us who didn't fit in. I broke my ankle here, and I think it was 1985. I jumped off the stage. I did that part on purpose. It was a little kid had stuck under the rope. I didn't see him, so I tried to avoid him and broke my ankle. I still have the scar there. It's hard to see now, but
it's tough to see this thing go, isn't it?
It is. It's very tough. Yeah.
So do you appreciate?
What, are you trying to get us to cry on camera or something?
I'm not into rock and roll because I never was, and that wasn't in my era. But when I can see people can come up and turn their lives over and praise God and put the worldly sins behind them, it's a miracle.
If you like rock and roll, let's talk about solid rock. Jesus is the solid rock.